could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on our agenda tonight is an RFP for banking services. I understand that previously there was a board motion that was approved to open an account at TD Bank. As I looked into records to try and put some semblance of reason as to what the analysis TD Bank had done to promise potential savings to the district, I find nothing. I do know they received 3 months of bank statements. In my opinion, 3 months here.
And they showed up.
I've never met those people before.
Okay. And then the savings that they were looking at, the $160,000 that was recorded in the minutes of that meeting, was a function of interest?
All I know is what they said. I don't know what the documentation was that they got to give their proposal. They just did say that the interest rate would be higher and that it would offset the fees. However, we hadn't been paying any fees.
Right. And did you contact Brian?
No.
Okay. And when the board unanimously decided to make this opening of an account, why didn't it continue forward? Was
That's
that-
what I should ask Mr. Flake. It was done under his, when he was here.
Well, actually, we're going to ask Mr. Cleaver that question because when it really boils down to it, the buck stops at the superintendent.
Sure.
So why didn't you see it forward? I mean, the board gave you an
Because
unanimous...
according to this timeline, I would have thought it would have taken place and it didn't.
Wait a second. You got two statements here. The first one is you were given direct orders from your
First
board.
of all, the statements I make are my statements. They're not
That's
how you
fine.
make them.
But the first one is that the board unanimously authorized this administration through the superintendent's office and the business administration to open up accounts with TD Bank to incur these savings that were documented by the finance committee meeting that recommended this process to take place to the board. Once you were given those direct orders to do a job, why did that not go forward? Why did it not take place?
I was not aware of the timeline that was presented by the business office was not taking place.
But the timeline was written in the finance committee meeting. The timeline would be a byproduct of the board vote. How would you not be aware of it?
Because I didn't check on it.
Did you ask?
No, I would just go that that timeline was being followed. There's a
But
lot of
you-
things that take
you
place
didn't-
in the business office that until something's presented to me, I'm not aware of.
That you're not aware of? So who is aware of it?
The business office will be aware of
And is the board aware of it?
it. If the business office shares that information.
Rita, you're on the finance committee. You recommended this process. You recommended it to the board. You are on the finance committee. You met with Brian afterwards. Did you provide any oversight to see if he was going to provide this process and save this district all this money? Because the reality is all that tax increase that you're asking for is equal to that process. Did you follow through at all?
I was here for all of the meetings. The recommendation was made. All of us, I believe, Rusty, me, you, and Andy, we all agreed to it based on the facts that we were given by Mr. Flake. We have found out recently that not all those facts were correct. At that point, I made the best decision I could.
What facts do you feel were not correct?
I'm not, that's it, that's all I'm saying.
What facts were a lie?
That's all I'm
If
saying.
they're not correct, someone lied.
I
So
do distinctly
Did Brian lie?
Tina, I distinctly remember Tina saying that we currently pay no fees. That I
understand.
recall. I remember her saying that. I don't remember what their answer was.
So you're saying Brian lied?
I think this process will clear
I
up.
think this process.
And the
Excuse me?
information on the tax bills.
I got my hand raised. Hold on a second.
Yes.
Well, is someone on the finance committee gonna, who's running the meeting? Sorry, are you? We all, okay. So I just found out, excuse me, I appreciate it, that Jim Thorpe Bank, Monchant Bank, BB&T were all contacted. Tina, were you aware that they were all contacted? And the only thing that was a problem was the fact that they needed to do positive pay as a security prevention for fraud. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Did you make our business manager aware of that responsibility that we were looking for positive pay because of the fraud
The
situation?
previous business manager was looking for positive pay.
Right. And then, and the board approved all that, and it was unanimous. Did that get transferred from you to the new business manager?
No, the board didn't approve, the board only approved.
Hold on a second. I'm going to let her ask a question, please.
If you're asking me, are you asking me if I specifically told Ms. Denicola that we had been discussing positive pay
Right.
as far as a security need for our district? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, I'll ask you the
Yes, she does know, yes, she does.
And
know
we
that.
understand that we had a fraud situation, and
Yes.
positive pay could prevent that fraud, or help alleviate the risk, mitigate the risk of fraud. Some of it.
There were other factors that could have alleviated that risk.
But the fact that you have a district that had a fraud situation, we agree with that.
Yes.
And then we agreed that we were going to change banks to find someone that would provide us more protection. And apparently the business manager invited in several banks to review that proposal, of which positive pay TD Bank was able to do. At which point the business finance meeting, or committee members, including Rita, yourself, you met with TD Bank at all? Do you remember that?
I was here for the meeting.
Excellent, okay. So then they discussed the fraud protection and also mentioned that there's a huge amount of interest that could also be acquired by changing banks, right? The finance committee then made a formal presentation. Do you remember that these other banks were asked and discussed?
The only one I
BBT
remember is TD Bank.
That's all.
and
That's all
Monson?
I remember is TD Bank.
Say, Tina, for my benefit, would you describe the fraud that occurred with our district? And
We had,
when was it?
we had checks that were written, that looked like payroll checks, and people were taking them to people that we didn't know all over the country. It was like a work from home sort of scheme, and people were taking them to check cashing places and trying to get them cashed, and those places called because they didn't think the checks looked right.
Right.
They were our routing number.
To protect the district, they showed up at a finance meeting, committee meeting, to discuss this protection and the benefits and the financial advantages of changing banks. They also discussed the process to which a transition would take place of opening a new account, the punk accounts, and then write checks on the Ma Chunk account until it's down to zero, and then they close out that account at the end. So you don't ever move money from one to the other like Mr. Cleaver had suggested. You always just do this transition. It's a much more reasonable, accountable solution. So that was discussed at the finance meeting that he missed.
Sure.
Then we went to the board meeting, got a unanimous approval to take this security process to protect this district almost a year ago. And now we're not doing it.
And Rita and Rusty, TD Bank was here, they sent like a representative to talk to the group.
Several of
They were
them.
here. Yeah, they were here. They didn't give like a paper presentation or give us numbers or anything. It was my understanding that night that Mr. Fike had those numbers, but we did not get them.
Sure, okay.
Not only did we get them, but we also, at that meeting, we suggested that Mr. Fike provide to this bank all of the transactional history, which I believe you did, and then she also helped us collect that data as well as board members.
Were you
So-
at that meeting?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
That's why I don't think that you guys are telling the truth anymore. And it's kind of disappointing because you should record the meetings. They're still on tape. You have minutes. You have the capability here. And you just kick it down the road and you lie.
Thank you.
I mean, his whole
Thank you,
board
Mr.
is doing that.
Bradley.
Thank you.
And that's got to end.
Again.
Because from an administrative standpoint,
Thank
the
you.
board is, you're wrong. The board is supposed to help its subordinate with the competency to do the job. And if they can't do the job, we're supposed to step in and help.
Thank you. Our next meeting will be Monday.
I've opened discussion still or not? Okay. Rita, the tax increase is going to pull about $360,000 from the community. Why not just cut the expenses by $360,000? Rather than put a burden of tax increase onto the community. You're talking about spending 20% more of local spending, $44 million. You couldn't find $300,000 in this finance committee meeting, or should I ask Richard?
You can ask whatever you want. I'm not engaging with you anymore. That's it.
You don't have an answer?
I do not have an answer. I refuse to answer. Thank
You
you.
refuse to answer?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Rich, did they ever even look at reducing the expenditures to cover the $300,000 that they were talking about having a tax increase?
I think we're looking at reducing costs now, and where everything has been reduced to the lowest level right now, and we need to get money from somewhere, right?
But if they implemented this TD Bank, they would have had hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest payments on
Yeah, but
our.
that's hindsight, and it didn't.
It wasn't. It was foresight.
It was hindsight. Now it's hindsight, because none of us, we assumed it happened and it didn't, so.
Okay.
That's-
Steve, did you look at anywhere to try to trim $300,000?
Read my lips.
Oh,
I'm not talking to you.
You're not talking. Okay. Mr. Finnegan, as a
Mr.
citizen,
Bradley,
did
again,
you
we're
look?
here to have a committee meeting.
Did you try to help?
Is there anything?
You said
on
new
the
business.
committee?
Did you try?
But the business is the committee's gonna run the meeting, not.
But if he says yes, hold on. If he says yes, he did look and he found one. Wouldn't you want to hear it?
First of all, Mr. Bradley.
Wouldn't you wanna
you're
hear-
running the meeting, you're asking questions from individuals. If they have something to say, they could say it.
I'm asking the question of the audience members to get their stakeholder input so that this committee, this board of elected individuals can serve the public,
Thank you.
because maybe he has a way they can save some
Does
money.
anyone else have anything for open discussion, despite other than being asked questions by Mr. Bradley? It's really
Well,
easy
doesn't
to
the
discuss.
committee members want to ask the,
We just did ask if
stakeholder?
they have any,
but don't you want to ask these people if they have a way to save money?
anything else?
No, Rita?
Anyone?
You don't want to do it? Not engaged?
Is everyone, anything from the committee, board?
You're not going to engage the stakeholders?
I just asked them, no one responded, thank you.
Thank you.
The meeting's adjourned at 6:47 PM. Again, next meeting is scheduled for September 9th at 6 PM.
I do have a question though, and maybe you can answer.
Wait.
How many percent do we have to be at when the kids all get treatment?
Well, it depends, let's say it was a
We'll have to run the,
vote.
I'll
Yeah.
get the calculation.
I know that there's a time period when that can happen.
There is a time period when that can happen. We're not quite there yet.
I didn't think we were there yet, but.
We'll check, we can check and see exactly what makes sense for that to be a possibility.
Yes,